feeling like a puppy, oh. I find it or shine like a diamond. You got me feeling like a puppy, oh. I find it or shine like a diamond.
Hi, Mr. White. Good afternoon. How are you? Great to see you. I'm very good, very good. As good as the clinic that I'm going to sell to
Wow.
you.
So, how much is this clinic gonna cost?
Oh, this is definitely the best point you like to listen to. This clinic itself, it can earn up to £2,000 per year. If you can do even better, you can earn even more than that.
Wow. As a businessman, I want to buy your clinic.
Of course, come on, just sign in over here. This place, very nice. Okay, good deal.
Good deal.
Come. Let's do a handover ceremony. Come. You're my big boy.
Your what?
Oh, this fits you very well. You look like a doctor now.
I feel
Okay.
the energy
Okay.
of a doctor.
I see you. Bye.
Yes, I got this clinic now. Hey, why my clinic not making money?
Oh my god, I'm going bankrupt. The caveat emptor principle, that literally means let the buyer be aware, has been followed by the courts for many years. The principle of caveat emptor was the guideline for the courts, and the point was that the buyer had the chance to use his knowledge to be careful or accept the cost of his inattention. This situation was perfect. If you try to imagine the scenario of the sales in medieval times, there were small fairs and small quantities of limited types of goods to be sold. The buyer often had the knowledge to recognize defective goods or critical information and to discuss the price with the seller on the point. The case that clearly illustrates the situation up to 17th century is the Chandler and Lopez case, in which the plaintiff brought an action against the defendant for the selling of a bizarre stone. This particular stone, found in the stomach of some animals, was supposed to have some medical properties. The majority of the judges held that the buyer was required to show either the seller knew the stone was not a bizarre, in which case the seller was liable for deceit, or that the seller had warranted that the stone was a bizarre. On the other hand, such an approach might be justifiable in an age where goods were generally simple and were normally traded at markets, where the buyers had the opportunity to examine goods before buying them. As a matter of fact, the Industrial Revolution and the skilled production of massive quantities of goods changed in some way the approach of the courts. Sellers and buyers were no longer contracting at fairs, but they were often actually in different places. Moreover, sellers started to realize that the quality of the products they were selling was very important in order to be competitive in a big market, where the same product was sold by different producers. As Carl Levin has pointed out, since the first part of the 19th century, something had changed. Sellers began to build goodwill in white markets to feel their standing behind goods to be no hardship, to lessen a threat to their solvency from thousands of luring claims, and to view it as the mark of business respectability and the road to future profit. The law of seller's obligation had to change to suit all these developments. Having regard to the past development of the caveat emptor principle that required the consumers to be aware of their purchases, our group seeks to analyze the contemporary standing of such principle in the UK and Malaysia, and then we will come to a conclusion whether such a standing is still appropriate or that it requires some modification that fits into this day and age.
In Malaysian law, Section 17 of Contract Act 1950 provides that there is no duty to disclose material facts to the other party during contractual negotiations. Fraud is not committed simply by keeping silent about a certain fact that could affect the decision or willingness of another to enter into the contract. However, a misrepresentation can arise even where no words are written or spoken. For example, in the case of R.M. Bernard, a person who goes into a shop in a university town wearing a cap and gown is making a representation that he is an undergraduate. There are two exceptions where silence can amount to fraud if there exists a duty for the person to speak and the silence itself is equivalent to speech. The first exception can occur in sale and purchase transaction where the relationship is more than the ordinary relationship of seller and buyer. The law imposes a duty to make disclosure is where fiduciary relationship exists. A fiduciary relationship arises where, by very nature of the relationship, one party reposes confidence or trust in each other. In Loader and Lord Loader, the agent had a positive duty to disclose to his principal all relevant information known to him as he had clearly breached the duty. Consequently, his silence or non-disclosure amounted to misrepresentation. There is also an application of the general principle of caveat emptor, which is known as let the buyer beware, that a seller does not have the duty to disclose the facts to the buyer. Similar to the case which involves goods and services, the seller is not obliged to inform buyer the condition of the goods he is selling. It is on the buyer to satisfy himself before making a purchase. In Lau He Tie and Hargill Engineering, Sandiam Berhad and Anor, the Federal Court held that it did not amount to misrepresentation as there was no active duty on the part of the seller to inform the buyer about the year of manufacture of the machine and had been involved in an accident. In Kaparunan, Chalpan and Chong Li Chin, the High Court held that the maxim caveat emptor applied to the claimant here. Abdul Hamid Mbong, Judge Goh On, stated that the proposition in law is that there is no fiduciary relationship between a vendor and purchaser, hence the vendor cannot be faulted if he failed to disclose any patent defect. Later on, the court found that there was a duty to disclose information and this type of contract was contract uberime fidei, which is in Latin for utmost good faith. The other party has to rely on the first party to supply him with information on which to decide whether or not he will contract with the first party. Most common examples are contracts of insurance, sale, suretyship, releases, and compromises. In Haji Ahmad Yarhan and Abdul Ghani Khan and Anor, the court stated the fact that the prospective bride has suffered from epileptic fits should be disclosed as the marriage was arranged. Lim Kim Hwa and Ho Trey Lan and Anor stated that familiar relationship between the parties require full and frank disclosure by the first defendant, not the active consummate. The second exception is illustrated in a situation where the content of the speech from B to A require responses from A. If A does not deny it, B is entitled to assume there is nothing wrong. There are also situations in which the failure to disclose all facts or partial disclosure may amount to fraud. In such situations, the law imposes upon representator the positive duty to rectify the wrong impression by making full disclosure. In R and Caseland, it was held that the company's silence or non-disclosure of the source of funds used to pay dividends rendered the statement a fraudulent misrepresentation. Last but not least, the general principle of Malaysian law is that one party is not obliged to disclose any material facts to another party during pre-contractual negotiations, but there would exceptions set up where parties have to disclose certain information to prevent any misleading in the contract.
In the English common law, a party's silence would not amount to a misrepresentation. Therefore, according to the general rule, in circumstances where a vendor failed to disclose any defects of the goods he is selling, the contract will not be interpreted to misrepresentation. This general rule supported the concept of caveat emptor, which means the buyer beware. Therefore, the parties entering into the contract should not expect the other party to disclose the relevant information by their own will. Instead, it's on their duty to acquire the information they wish to know, because it's up to the party to make a best bargain for themselves. This can be seen in several case laws such as Fletcher and Creel, Moreover, in Pig and Gurney, where the House of Lords held that the failure to disclose the liability before the sales of share was not misrepresentation, even though it's disapproved by moral. In order for a failure to disclose to be actionable, active misrepresentation must be present. In other words, sellers do not have duty to disclose any facts to the buyers, but if they disclose it, it must be done truthfully. It is very normal for a salesman to remain silent on their weaknesses, as the information might affect the value of the subject matters in that contract. Although the general rule stated that the silence would not give rise to misrepresentation, in certain special circumstances, there can be exception to the general rule. Firstly, we look at the contract requiring verime fide, which means utmost good faith. Traditionally, this concept has been opposed by English law until the case of Interphoto Pictures Library and Stiletto Visual Programs. This established the obligation for the parties to play fair. This has mostly been seen in the case of insurance, where the party is required to disclose any facts that might affect the decision of accepting the risk and what premium to charge by the insurance company. The basis of the rule is that it's almost impossible for the insurance company to find out the relevant facts of the other party. Therefore, the other party should not have an unfair bargaining position over the others. This can be illustrated in the case of IMG and Siemens. They did not disclose the facts of having reliable resources informing the rumors of cancellation of the tournament. It eventually got cancelled and IMG sought for compensation but failed. The court held that in the contract of insurance, utmost good faith is very important, and the failure to disclose the rumor made the contract viable. Moreover, misrepresentation also arises when there is subsequent falsity where the statement was true when it's made, but due to the changes it has become untrue. This can be shown in With and O'Flanagan, where the doctor selling his medical practice made a true statement of income of £200 per annum. But he then fell sick and unable to work, making the practice worthless when the contract is being signed. Court held that the failure to disclose the charge in income has amounted to misrepresentation, so the contract was voidable. Subsequently, as mentioned, when party made a representation, it must be full, clear, and transparent statement. Therefore, a party can be made liable under misrepresentation when they made half-truth statement, which is a partial reveal of the facts. In the case of Dimmock and Hallett, it can be seen that the statement of land to let was true, but the silence of facts misrepresentation the whole situation and therefore lead to misrepresentation. A duty to disclose will also arise depending on the nature of relationship between the parties rather than the type of contract. Some of the fiduciary relationships such as doctor-patient, parent-child and solicitor-clients, partnership between both parties can also establish a duty to disclose information. Where the rule lay in the case of Conlon and Sims, it was held that the duty of disclosing arises. During the negotiation stage, this has been confirmed in the case of Biddle and Kaiser, that stated the duty would arise because of the opportunity of both parties to acquire shares. Lastly, when there is a voluntary assumption of responsibility from one party, where in the case of Banque Financière de la Cité and Westgate Insurance, the court held that a party will be liable by keeping silence when the party made a voluntary assumption of representation and it was being relied by the other party. This was followed in the case of Hamilton and Allied Domecq. The claimant entered into a contract believing that the product should be marketed first in catering sector, but instead the company distributed the product in the shop. Claimant then sued the defendant under misrepresentation but was rejected by the court as they held that they did not voluntarily assume responsibility towards claimant. Silence will only be seen as misrepresentation when both the criteria stated in the case of Banque are fulfilled. In conclusion, English General Rule has stated that the party has no duty to disclose any information, but in certain circumstances, the party will be required to disclose any information that may be relevant to the contract.
As discussed earlier, it is unfortunate for consumers, who are generally lay people, that there is no rule or duty imposed on their contracting party counterpart to disclose information relating to the agreement. Thus, they are sometimes kept in the dark over information which may put them in a disadvantageous position. However, in certain contracts, there is a certain level of protection for consumers which is laid down in the relevant statutes. One such example is the Malaysian Insurance Act of 1996, where in section 150 subsection 1 of the Act, the insured has to disclose materials that are relevant to the licensed insurer. The only exceptions are matters that diminishes the risk to the insurer, common knowledge, matters the insurer already knows, and those which the insurer has waived requirements for disclosure. According to Santana Das, the disclosure must be made voluntarily in the sense that even if the insurer does not ask an appropriate question, either in the proposal, from or otherwise, the insured is bound to disclose any information which is material or relevant to the risk. He must not wait to be asked. Such duty exists independently of any proposal form. Besides that, it was affirmed in the Court of Appeal case law of To Kim Lian and another against Asia Insurance in 1996, where Lord Justice Lim said, "It is a general principle in insurance law that an insured is under a duty to disclose material facts, and the absence of a proposal form does not modify the insured's duty." In Aziza binti Abdullah against Arab Malaysian Eagles, also in 1996, it was further expounded that the duty of disclosure is not confined only to the insured, but insurers are also bound by this common law duty. It is a reciprocal duty as well. And it is equally a duty on the part of the insurer to define the information he seeks plainly and clearly. This can be seen as an attempt to prevent any non-disclosure form from both the insured and the insurers. Therefore, insurance law, to some extent, does adhere to the principles of Iuber Rima Fide, that the duty is not only confined to the insured but also to the insurers, who seek information plainly and clearly. Section 150 subsection 2 of the IA 1996 recognizes that as a fact that the Iuber Rima Fide principle will not bite in circumstances. In essence, the statute as well as case laws do not permit the insurers to hide behind the veil of Iuber Rima Fide principles. A similar approach was enacted under the English law in the form of Consumer Insurance Disclosure and Representations Act in 2012. However, there exists a major need for reform in certain areas. Often, most consumers do not know that there is a requirement to disclose material facts or the information that are considered relevant to the insurer. In the case of Horn and Poland, the defendant repudiated liability of an insurance contract on the grounds that the insured did not disclose that he was of an alien birth and that he entered the contract under an assumed name. According to Lord Justice Lush, the plaintiff was making a contract of insurance, and if he failed to disclose what a reasonable man would disclose, he must suffer the same consequences as any other person who made a similar contract. Similarly, in Lambert against Cooperative Insurance Society, the insurer did not ask whether her spouse had been previously convicted, neither did she venture into such information. When she sought to recover, the insurers repudiated the claim on grounds that the conviction was a material fact. The Court of Appeal upheld this contention as valid, and it was of no consequences that the insured did not realize the fact that she ought to have disclosed. There is also the problem of the remedy, which allows the insurer to repudiate the whole contract for material non-disclosure. Where the insurer establishes that the policy owner have failed to disclose a material fact, it may refuse all claims, even if it was only a small change to the policy. This is harsh on the assured and defeats the whole aim of the assured taking out an insurance policy. As Stoughton Lord Justice put it out in Causa and Eagle Star, avoidance for non-disclosure is a drastic remedy. It enables the insurer to disclaim liability after and not before he has discovered that the risk has turned out to be a bad one. It leaves the insured without the protection which he thought he had contracted and even paid for. Although a major breakthrough of the principle of Iuber Rima Fide can be seen in insurance law, there are still loopholes which still causes confusion, particularly on the consumer's part. Therefore, it can be concluded that with the same laws, this area of insurance law, that there is still the lingering problem that continues to haunt consumers who are laymen regarding disclosure of information.
In regards to the reforms available for two positions, we must first look at how each position has failed to remedy and cover the loophole in this law. Being said that, as mentioned by my fellow group mates, the duty to disclose of material facts are similar for both of the positions. One of the reforms that is applicable for both of the positions is to acknowledge the doctrine of good faith into their legislation. The reason is because a mere doctrine of good faith might not be nearly enough to be binding. In general, both positions practice caveat emptor, which mentioned in above as let the buyers beware. This explains that the buyer should be aware and alert of dishonesty and the possibility of cheating, which binds to the consumer and the buyers. For example, in Canada, a foreign Commonwealth country's position, they have merged the doctrine of good faith and the maxim of caveat emptor. It further explains that the concept of caveat emptor lies in the far end of the spectrum of the doctrine of good faith. As compared in Malaysia and the United Kingdom, the court and law does apply these doctrines and maxims. However, these general ideas and concept is not specific enough to cover a wide range of law. Therefore, it is only reasonable for the legislature of both positions to implement and make laws in regards to these ancient maxims. Furthermore, both legislation can also implement the doctrine of caveat emptor into the statute of good faith. This will further increase the protection and fairness of the transaction. Caveat emptor, literal translation from Latin, would be let the sellers beware. Similarly, this means that the seller are held accountable to whatever they advertise about the product and therefore must be honest in disclosing any relevant material facts of the particular goods that he is selling. In Malaysia's position, the court impliedly recognized doctrine of good faith, which includes the caveat emptor and the caveat emptor. This can be seen in the section 14 and 17 of Sales and Goods Act 1957. Moreover, the section 10 of Part 2 of Consumer Protection Act 1999 provides that the information of the product that is being sold needs to be truthful and without any misrepresentation or false misleading actions. Being said that, it is clear that this act contains some essence of doctrine of good faith, and also the Sales of Goods Act in 1957 clearly said that there was a limitation on contractual freedom between parties. Coming to the United Kingdom's position, the existing act that is responsible for protecting consumer are the Sales of Goods Act 1979 and the Consumer Protection Act 1987. Even though these acts did cover mischief and protect the consumer, it fails to remedy silence, since general rule is that silence does not amount to misrepresentation. The buyers can also choose to disclose information that will only be advantageous to him, and this shows the need of implementing the doctrine of good faith into a statute. This is where the implementation of statute, which includes a caveat emptor, will be most applicable. All in all, after going through the laws of protecting the consumer and the sellers, it seems that it is not holistic enough to cover every aspect. It is flawed and there is an obvious lacuna to be filled. By implementing the doctrine of good faith, which covers the concept of caveat emptor and caveat emptor, it will fill the lacuna and provide a victim a better protection against dishonest seller or buyer, or even to those who uses half-truths. This doctrine will compel any seller to be at their good faith and disclose any relevant details and material facts regarding to the product they are selling, or make sure the buyer have the awareness of asking for more details and be more aware. This will not only solve the problem, and it can be also act as a preventive measure to avoid and reduce the victims, regardless of whether they are buyers or sellers that had already suffered a loss, and yet the law still fails to provide a remedy.
On the light of the historical point of view and analysing the current law, even though the UK and Malaysia still assume that the main principle of the law of sales is caveat emptor, I have to agree that the strict following of such doctrine has been relieved over the years by providing the consumers a better position to bargain. Unfortunately, I have to consider that modern legislation might be developing in a trend that's going too far in the production of the buyer, even when the buyer is not a consumer and could bear the risk deriving from the normal way of doing businesses. Sometimes there is no fault and someone has to suffer the consequences of the bad luck. Looking at the development of cases, the seller could be suffering most of the consequences of the bad luck. And this is indeed against the aim of the law to facilitate commercial transactions. The principle of caveat venditor can be justified when there is a disproportion of power between seller and buyer. For example, when there is a transaction between a big corporation and an ordinary consumer, but it is totally against the principle of laissez-faire when this proportion is not represented because the buyer is also contracting in the course of businesses. Therefore, lawmakers should be cautious in the midst of reforming laws that protect the consumers, because there shouldn't be any imbalance of bargaining power being granted onto any of the parties' hand.